This is Money, Motivation, and Mike, and I am your host, Michael Wainwright, in charge of all the controls, audio engineer Jason Wright. And hello to you, world. This is the show that will change your life. You can contact us at info@mx3.vip, and you can find all of our content mx3.vip or on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@mx3podcast. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to get notified of all of our new content, which comes out every Monday morning around 9 o'clock. Jason, continuing on Dallas Cowboys here, and I'm very, very interested in today's topic, which is the 1980s Dallas Cowboys, because of the 60s and the 70s and then to the 90s. A lot of people think that the 1980s was just a dud. We're going to get into that here momentarily, and I'm going to show you why it wasn't. Nevertheless, in the last 28 days, 10,700 views on our YouTube channel. That's a little over 2,675 a week. And over the last 7 days, we're at 2.5K, 2,500. Lots of good numbers there. As always, the listening audience, the viewing audience continues to show us that we're bringing the proper content to you on a regular basis. 23,357 on the podcast over the last 28 days. Very, very good numbers, and thank you once again for listening and watching Money, Motivation, and Mike. Now, before we get into the 1980s Dallas Cowboys, and next week, we may have to pause for a minute on the Dallas Cowboy deal, because I'm also anxious in this deal, Jason, that someone, a representative from Texas, is trying to nominate Donald Trump to be Speaker of the House.
They actually did nominate him.
We need to get into that. We need to figure out how that could even happen.
Right.
Being an elected official or not being an elected official and still being Speaker of the House. And as we, a lot of us know, the first Speaker of the House in the history of the United States of America, House of Representatives, has been removed. Never before until this last week, October 2023, has it ever happened. And for us who live in the North Texas area, the Speaker of the House is a big deal because of Sam Rayburn being from Bonham, Texas, right across back over to the east of where our studio is. Speaker of the House for many, many years there, elected in the 1920s up through the 1960s. We've discussed Sam Rayburn, but he was Speaker of the House for so long. He eventually became known as Mr. Speaker, not Mr. Rayburn. So good stuff there. We're gonna maybe talk about that next week. It's time for another reaction video. But today, 1980s Dallas Cowboys. Now, I did receive an email and also a question on why is the Dallas Cowboys in the NFC East, the National Football Conference Eastern Division. Okay, now you think about that. We had the 1970 merger where 3 NFL teams went to the AFL, which ends up being the AFC. We've had expansion. For example, the Seattle Seahawks, Jason, have been in the AFL, AFC, and the NFC. Baltimore Colts, Cleveland Browns, Cleveland Browns, not the new Cleveland Browns. Remember, that's another story as well. And the Pittsburgh Steelers, Baltimore Colts, and the Browns. All been in both conferences. So have the Seattle Seahawks. And they continue to realign as we've had expansion over the last 30 years. 1976, Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Seattle Seahawks. And then we had, there in the 90s, the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Carolina Panthers. And then in 2002, the Houston Texans, because the Houston Oilers had moved to Tennessee, became the Tennessee Oilers, and then the Tennessee Titans. And somehow, Houston gets another team. Was new ownership, new monies, so that could be the situation there. So Houston Texans come into play as well. And then since all those times that we've had this expansion, there has always been new divisions, new alignments, new opponents, or taking someone out. for example, the San Diego Chargers, now the Los Angeles Chargers, the Oakland Raiders, the teams out on the West Coast, they're always going to be in the West. All right. So here's the Dallas Cowboys, who have always been in the East, and they're a long ways from being in the East. So why would the Dallas Cowboys not be in a division, let's say, with the New Orleans Saints? They're both in the same conference. You could say they're not going to be in the conference with the Kansas City Chiefs and the Houston Texans because they're in the NFC and those teams are in the AFC. All right, but why aren't they in the division with the Saints? Why aren't they in division with the Cardinals? Now I know the Cardinals now are considered the West Coast, out there with Seattle and San Francisco and the Rams, but there are teams closer to us than New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, way up there. Mm-hmm. I mean, you got to go over a lot of NFC teams on that airplane to get up there to that northern eastern seaboard. Why isn't the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in our division? I know the Jaguars, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Miami Dolphins are a part of the AFC, but then there's the Carolina Panthers. I mean, this conversation could go on and on and on. So why are the Dallas Cowboys in the NFC East? Okay, you got to go back here and you got to go back and research this thing to when the merger all happened. And it also goes back to how did the Dallas Cowboys get on Thanksgiving Day other than 2 years since 1966? So on and on and on. Here's the reason why. Tex Schramm, a mind way ahead of his time. There's a reason he's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. There's a reason he's in Dallas Cowboys Ring of Honor. A man way ahead of his time. The first man to bring computer system to evaluating players. Got the Dallas Cowboys on a Thanksgiving Day game that nobody else wanted because he wanted exposure. First team to have cheerleaders, wanted exposure. Okay, so you think about there in 1960 and all the 1960s, even to this day, what are some of the biggest cities in the United States of America? New York City. So the Dallas Cowboys go to New York City to play every year. Now, I understand that they actually play in New Jersey. That's another debate. Now, they don't even play in the state of New York, but right across the river, right across the Hudson. Nevertheless, the New York Football Giants, the Cowboys go to New York every year. Probably the most popular city, Tokyo, Japan, maybe. I mean, New York is the name of all names when it comes to a city. Then we're going to go to the nation's capital. Dallas Cowboys are going to go play in the nation's capital every year. I mean, you can see all the monuments, the Washington Monument, the Capitol. Every time you see a Dallas Cowboy football game playing the team of Washington, whatever their name is at that particular time, you're going to see all this stuff, the nation's capital. In essence, the most important city in the United States. And then the other city, the Philadelphia Eagles, where the Liberty Bell is, where the Constitution and all these things, all these historical things over the last 200 plus years, 250 years have happened for this great nation that we live in. And Tex Schramm, because of his good buddy, Pete Rozelle was the commissioner of the NFL. The NFL-AFL merger stayed NFL. Pete Rozelle's the commissioner. His good buddy is Tex Schramm. They both grew up in the Los Angeles Rams club in the 1950s. They had that. All right. It was a good old boy system then. It's still a good old boy system today. And that's the reason some of the things happen. We've talked about Colin Kaepernick on this show, mm-hmm. and how he is right or wrong, good or bad, him, in my eyes, being blackballed out of the NFL and not having a shot at getting on another team with some of the lackluster quarterback play that we have in this league. There's only 32 of them, but it seems like it's hard to put 32 quality ones out there. But nevertheless, that's how the Dallas Cowboys got in the NFC East. The good old buddy system, the good old brother-in-law system of getting yourself aligned with the right people, starting back. See, people don't think about this, and I'm getting off the Cowboys here for a minute. It's always about relationships. It's always about who you know, not what you know. Now, you got to know some information when you get into the room, but how do you get into the room? Typically, you don't get into the room because of what you know. It's because of who you know. Smartest people in the world have not done a whole lot with their life because they didn't have the wherewithal on how to get into the room. And that's who you know. You've got to be able to build that persona, if you will, from the start of your life. You were the best looking, the best lawn mowing junior high kid there's ever been. Somebody in that city recognized that. You were outspoken and really involved in whatever it was in high school, and on and on and on. And you got yourself involved in your community when you got out of college, or whenever you did get into your profession, whatever case. You're always building on what's going to happen today. That goes back to Tex Schramm and Pete Rozelle, and something as simple as a football team being involved in three of the largest cities in the country. Now remember, because like I said on a previous show, Dallas Cowboys were the first team south of Washington, D.C. Back in 1960, and definitely southwest for that matter. So lots of good things that went along with getting the Dallas Cowboys the exposure that they are, and that's why they're on a third of the primetime, at least a third of the primetime games on an annual basis. Now, we're coming out of these 1970s, Jason, and we're getting into how great Dallas played in the 70s with the Roger Staubach, and coming out of 5 Super Bowl appearances and 2 wins, two Super Bowl wins and 6 and 12, and going into 1980 after the 1979 season when Roger Staubach decides he's going to retire, because people don't remember. Roger went to the Naval Academy for 4 years. He served. He graduated in 63. He's a Heisman Trophy winner in 63. Then he went and served. And his vacation time, the Naval Academy allowed him to have his vacation time during spring training, during training camp. So he could attend training camp with the Dallas Cowboys. But after, let's just say, his 2 weeks of vacation was over, he reported back to the Naval Academy because he was in the Navy. And that's why his career literally did not get started till 1969. I believe at that time he was 27 years old. He's a 27-year-old rookie. But nevertheless, his body had taken a lot, and, he was 37, 38 years old when he retired. He was still owed by NFL standards, but he had only played roughly 10 years, 10, 11 years, 69 to 79. But nevertheless, he retires, and Dallas had a very, very, very capable backup named Danny White. Now, here's a little more tidbit for you. Danny White was the backup. Danny White played in the World Football League. You ever heard of the World Football League? That was the original competition to the NFL. All right. So the AFL and the NFL merge. Now here in the mid-70s, there's a World Football League. Danny White played in that league. Cowboys picked him up whenever that league folded, and they were able to go out and get all those players, just like the USFL players in 1984-85, which, by the way, Donald Trump had a team in that. I think he was even the commissioner of that particular league. But nevertheless, Danny White comes along back 1979. Now, this is important because Danny White is fixing to be the quarterback in the 1979 NFL amateur draft. Roger Staubach's the quarterback. Danny White is the backup. And a guy named Glenn Carano was the third-string quarterback. Glenn Carano was a good third stringer. They had a solid quarterback room. It wasn't like they needed someone else. Okay. In the first round of the 1979 draft, and we've talked about on this show with the original 3 of Gil Brandt being the third one with Landry and Schramm, and Gil Brandt being the mastermind behind the drafts that were all being put together in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Gil Brandt, in the first round of the 1979 draft, wanted to draft Joe Montana. Joe Montana ended up going in the third round to the San Francisco 49ers, of which we'll discuss here in the 1981 season. But Gil Brandt said, this is a good player. Now remember, he played at Notre Dame. His last ever game was at the Cotton Bowl, right there in downtown, when playing the University of Houston in the Cotton Bowl. One of his all-time legendary comebacks starting in college. But Gil Brandt's recommendation to Tex Schramm and Tom Landry was to take the quarterback out of Notre Dame in the first round, Joe Namath. We've already got 3 studs. And at this time, remember, there's no time in sight of when Roger Staubach was going to retire. Little alone did we know he was going to retire in 1 year. Actually, that would have been April of 79, and Rogers retiring in January of 80. So, in essence, eight months later, Rogers retiring and Danny White's taking over. Now, why is this important? What would have happened to Danny White if Joe Montana had came a Dallas Cowboy and just became the third stringer and cutting Glenn Carano, like I say, was a good third string quarterback. True story. And I've heard that from Clint Murkison himself, that was the number one guy on his board when it came time for Dallas to pick in the first round of the 1979 NFL draft.
Wow.
As we all know, we didn't take him. And he wins 4 Super Bowls in the 1980s, which brings us into 1980. And like I told you at the introduction of the show, a lot of people think the 1980s Dallas Cowboys were just a bunch of bums. Which really wasn't the case at all. And by the way, I threw that bum out there because Bum Bryant's fixing to become the owner of the Dallas Cowboys. So I guess they were bums. They were bums boys. But 1980, Cowboys go to the NFC Championship game in 1980 as a wild card because the Philadelphia Eagles beat us. We actually had a 25-point lead on them in the last game of the season. We did beat them in 1980, last game of the season, and we tied at 12-4. Cowboys won 12 games in 1980. Bunch of bums, right? Got beat in the NFC Championship game by the old Ron Jaworski, better known as Jaws. Come back in 1981 and go 12-4 again and win the division and have a 27-21 lead with less than 5 minutes to go in the NFC Championship at Candlestick Park. And then, as we know, the Joe Montana-led 49ers go 89 yards in 4 minutes and score with 58 seconds left. And they go on to go to the Super Bowl and beat the Cincinnati Bengals. This is 1981. Now, a couple of things. You go back and you watch those last 58 seconds of that NFC Championship game in 1981. Danny White makes a pass to Drew Pearson. I don't recall if it was double coverage or triple coverage, but it looked like you couldn't put a needle through this hole. And he throws it in there and hits Drew Pearson. And Ronnie Lott of the 49ers makes a shoestring tackle, or Drew Pearson is gone to the house. At least into field goal range. Remember, we're down 28-27 at this time. But Danny White was that close. And it had gotten them the lead. Threw a big long pass to Tony Hill down the left sideline to go up 27-21 in the 1981 NFC Championship game. And Doomsday could not hold the lead. Now, if everybody remembers on the catch with Dwight Clark, that third down play, it certainly looked like he was throwing the ball out of the back of the end zone. Had Ed Too-Tall Jones right in his face. Charlie Waters, the legendary safety back there, he said when he saw the pass up in the air, he was already trying to think about what we were going to call on fourth down because he knew that ball was going into the first row. And Dwight Clark jumps out of his shoes and catches the ball out of the sky, and there we are. But people do not remember that Danny White was on the comeback with 58 seconds left to put the Dallas Cowboys in the Super Bowl again. But nevertheless, it didn't happen. Now we go to 1982, Jason, which was a strike-shortened season. And there was only 9 games that year. Dallas was 6-3 in those 9 games. And at 6-3, that got them the number 2 seed behind the Washington Redskins. All right? At that time, because of the strike, they redid the playoffs. Even though you were the number 2 seed and would only have to win a divisional game in the championship game to go to the Super Bowl, you had to win 3 games that year. Dallas won their first 2. They go to the third game, the third NFC Championship game in a row under Danny White, and get beat by the Redskins up at the old RFK to not go to the Super Bowl again. So you got a quarterback that has went to 3 NFC championship games in a row, and people are ready to run him out of town. Do you know how many Dallas Cowboy quarterbacks have went to 3 NFC championship games in a row since 1960? Roger Staubach and Troy Aikman. Not even the legendary Don Meredith, who went to number 1 and number 2, as we've talked about as well. And no one since. Well, as we all know, we haven't been to an NFC championship game since Troy Aikman in 1995. But Staubach and Aikman are the only 2 that have done what Danny White did. But the unfortunate thing for Danny White is they went ahead and finished off the job and got themselves into the Super Bowl, where Danny came up a shoestring short. Now we go to 1983. All right. It's as a matter of fact, in some of my research, I read in 1982, when the Redskins beat the Cowboys, it's the end of an era. Well, most people don't realize in 1983, the Cowboys went 12-4 again. 12-4. And that's a bust. Now, we did get beat out in the first round of the playoffs by a rookie named Eric Dickerson with the Los Angeles Rams. But we went 12-4 in 1983. And 1984 still made the playoffs again at 9-7. I'm sorry, we missed the playoffs in 84. We went 9-7, another winning record. Now, what was important in 1984, as Clint Murkison, the original owner of the Dallas Cowboys, sells the team to Texas oil tycoon magnate H.R. Bum Bryant. So that's how Bum Bryant became the owner of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, Bum did not have the vision that Murkison did, and Bum wanted to dabble a little bit more than Murkison did. But you know what? He was only getting us ready for 1989 when we inherited Jerry Jones. But nevertheless, Bum kind of put a bum deal out there, even though did win nine games in his 1984 season and only missed the playoffs for the first time in 10 years and only the second time in 18 years. That's incredible. That's incredible. Okay. Now, 1985. Remember, we're not only on the decline, we're bottoming out. Tom Landry, in what I call one of his best coaching jobs ever, takes the 1985 Dallas Cowboys and wins the division title and sweeps the New York Giants, the New York Football Giants, at that time coached by Bill Parcells, beat them to win the division championship. Now, we lose in the first round, and the Giants end up playing in the NFC Championship against the big bad Chicago Bears, the Bears. But then again, the Giants come back the next year. They win the Super Bowl. They win it 3 years later in 1990, on and on and on. But you got Tom Landry, legendary Tom Landry, 25 years in the business of being the head coach, outmaneuvering what a lot of people consider in Bill Parcells to be one of the greatest coaches ever, with an undermanned team. Them Giants teams were loaded, and the Cowboys rolled out there and beat them in the 85. Okay, so I've given you 80 through 85. Most franchises in football would take 80 through 85, and it would be some of the best years in the history of their football club. We go to 86. 86, the Cowboys were 6-2. 6-2. Now remember, Danny White is not the dude. Nobody likes Danny White because he's following Roger Staubach. What are you going to do? Mm-hmm. And in essence, he squeezed in between Staubach and Aikman. So he's probably not going to be, he's a whole lot better than people give him credit for. And a lot of the records that have been broke since Danny White retired was Danny White's records, not Roger Staubach's records. Different era, because I know in 1971, Staubach led the NFL in passing with like 1,700 yards. How times have changed. Now they throw a ton of yards, 5,000 yards a season. But yeah, Staubach led the NFL with like 1,700 passing yards one year. It was just a different deal. Hand it off 3 yards in a cloud of dust and take your time and go down the field, blah, blah, blah. But in 1986, Cowboys are 6-2 at the midway point, going to the Meadowlands to play the Giants. on a Sunday afternoon, and Danny White breaks his finger. That was the end of the 1986 season. Danny White, the guy that not many people wanted to have around, has this team at 6-2 in first place, playing the Giants there in a situation of about to beat the Giants, breaks his finger, has to leave the game, does not play the rest of the year, and the Dallas Cowboys without Danny White goes 1-7 the rest of the way. Yes. And the New York Football Giants go on and win the Super Bowl. So, whatever you want to say about Danny White, most of it is a promising deal. So, the Cowboys in 86 go 7-9. They go 7-8 in 1987. Now, why did they go 7-8? That's 15 games. Another strike shortened season. A guy named Kevin Sweeney was our quarterback most of that year. A big deal. Randy White. This is the difference in times. You think about Randy White and Tony Dorsett, legendary Dallas Cowboys, Ring of Honor, and also the fact that they're in Hall of Fame. They went in the Hall of Fame in the same time at the 1993 season, the 94 Super Bowl. Okay, those are big time names in the ranks. They had to cross the picket line because they needed the money. In 1987, two of your legendary players have to cross the picket line to play because they needed the money. Now these guys hold out because $15 million is not enough. And they're never to be heard from again, and it doesn't matter because they got tons of money. But two of these legendary players of the Dallas Cowboys had to cross the line because they needed a paycheck, which caused a lot of problems in itself, as you can imagine, trying to stay united, whether you are or you aren't in love with striking and unions and all that other stuff. But this team still went 7-8. Obviously, that's a losing season, but it wasn't like it was 1-15 like it was in 1989. Now, 1988, we go 3-13. And the best part about 1988 was that we drafted Michael Irvin out of the University of Miami. So that was a big time thing for us in 1988. And then we come to 1989. Because see, every one of these years has significance. I've given you the first 5 years of how much winning they did. I give you 86, how they were winning until a drastic injury to their quarterback. Now, 87 being strike, 88, this is Landry's last hurrah. Landry's play calling was really struggling. He really should have retired after the 85 season, after that miraculous job he did. But nevertheless, he didn't. And if you've ever heard of Bryant Bank, I told you Bum Bryant was an oil business, but Bryant Bank was also his banks too, is his business as well. He was involved in the banks. Okay, well, they're in the late 80s, the savings and loan crisis, and Bryant's savings and loan companies were obviously really in trouble, and they were taken over by, it's not the SEC, it's the group that's in charge of the banks. It starts with a F, FS something. But he had to sell. And with the rest of his money tied up in the Cowboys, he was forced to sell the Cowboys to Jerry Jones, February the 25th, 1989, for $150 million, Jason, and that included the stadium in Irving, Texas. A lot of people call him Michael Irving, but it's Michael Irvin, who played in Irving, Texas. Now, I make fun of that because Frank Gifford could never figure that out on Monday Night Football. So Jones immediately comes in, fires Tom Landry. I can still remember the picture of him and his wife in their car down in Austin. Because remember, Landry was an Austin boy. He went to University of Texas. Fires Landry on the spot, basically hires Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy Johnson was in Dallas on the front of the Dallas Morning News for Landry had even been fired, having dinner at a restaurant with Jerry Jones and Jean, Jerry's wife. Jerry got off to the worst start that you could possibly do. Not only did he fire the legendary only coach in the history of the Dallas Cowboy Football Club, but he did it in a wrong way by doing things before he started new business before he finished up old business. Let's just put it that way. Mm-hmm. And then you roll out here with this college dude named Jimmy Johnson, and you go 1-15. And I can still remember them, how pumped they were about winning a preseason game in 1989. The Texas Bowl, as we used to call it. Cowboys and the Houston Oilers always played the final preseason game of the year. And the Jimmy Johnson-led Cowboys won that game. And they running off the field like they had won the Super Bowl. Embarrassment to the whole franchise. Oof. And they take that preseason victory and the Texas Bowl and turn it into 1-15. Ouch. And by the way, the quarterback that year became Troy Aikman because of here's another great thing about 1989. In the first pick of the 1989 draft, and we've talked about how the Cowboys got that draft pick in the past, but the first pick, Cowboys take Troy Aikman. The second pick, they take Daryl Johnston, who ends up was our fullback, and back in those days, the fullback position was important. Heck, now not even the running back position is important. And then we take with the third pick, Mark Stepnoski, the center, all-pro center. Mm-hmm. With the fourth pick, we take Tony Tobert, defensive end. Big presence throughout all those 90s. That's your first 4 picks in 1989 to go on the back end of taking Michael Irvin in 1988. So I've just shown you light to what 88 and 89 was all about. But now we get down to what they call the Great Train Robbery. Because remember, we had this one asset on our team, Herschel Walker. Herschel Walker is another story in itself because, go back, remember, now everybody's pooping on Tom Landry because of the 3-13 season and finishing up his career in an ugly way. But when the USFL broke up, or when the USFL came into existence, Tom Landry used a late pick to take Herschel Walker. So when the USFL broke up, Herschel Walker was the rights of the Dallas Cowboys. You can always take a positive approach to everything. Because if there was no USFL in the mid-1980s, when Herschel Walker was coming out of the University of Georgia, he'd probably been the first pick in the draft. Dallas Cowboys wouldn't have got him. Now, we got him, and 87, 88, 89 was on our team. We would not have had him, like I say, if there had not been a USFL. The team was not very good. So Jimmy Johnson, what does he do? He trades Herschel Walker to the Minnesota Vikings for 5 veteran players and 8 draft picks. That's why they call it the Great Train Robbery. One of those draft picks ended up being Emmitt Smith. And he took those 8 draft picks and then traded some more, and I think he turned that into like 12 or 14 draft picks. Because, you know, the one thing about Jimmy Johnson is he could evaluate talent. He could find a diamond in the rough with no problem. But that trade, that draft, impacted a team to be able to go from 1-15 to Super Bowl champions in 4 years, and then win 3 Super Bowls out of the next 4 years into the 1990s, which we'll get to in an episode coming up in the future. Because I don't know, the 1990s in my eyes will probably be a 2 episode, just like the 70s should have been. But I got long-winded. Heck, we're long-winded today. I think we're 30 minutes into this episode right now. So I got a lot of good tidbits and information on the Dallas Cowboys. As you can tell, they're kind of important to me. For those of you that are watching online, you can see that the whole room has a lot of Dallas Cowboys stuff in it. So you know what we need to do? We need to get some Washington Redskin fans in here. We need to get some Philadelphia Eagle fans in here. As those games come up, we need to get some people in here. We need to debate because they think they're the best team and they think they're the best team, and they're our number one rivalry. Everybody's number one rivalry is the Dallas Cowboys. Most teams. Mm-hmm. The Dallas Cowboys' number one rivalry is who? We'll continue that in the upcoming future. Money, Motivation, and Mike is always glad to have you on our channels here. Info at MX3.VIP is where you can get send us your information with your questions and comments, etc. And you can always find all of our content at MX3.VIP or on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@MX3podcast. And don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and hit the icon bell to get notified of all of our information and content, which comes out every Monday morning around 9 o'clock. So once again, for everyone who's been a part of this one, continue to live your life the right way.